Okay, so we are on Nun Gimel Lamed Aleph in the middle. 53A2. So what we were in the middle of, so we were saying, is there a difference if a woman would sell the futures right to her ksuva to someone else? Would the ksuvas banim dichrin also become terminated because it got sold, or would it remain? Is it separate from the ksuva, or and if she would sell her futures right to her husband, what would that be different or the same? And then I think Marty brought up a question, and it's a good question. I don't know the answer. Is that if a woman would sell her futures right to her ksuva, wouldn't that be similar to like living without a ksuva, which is something that's not permitted? Even if the ksuva gets lost, we have to write a ksuva de erchasa. You have to write a new ksuva because it's for her protection to have a ksuva. But that's what the Gemaras were. So Rava said, and we'll just go back on the bottom of the first column. Rava said, "Pshita li machers ksuvas alacherim yesh ksuvas banim dichrin." If she sold her ksuva to others, the ksuvas banim dichrin stays intact. So when she dies, the rights that the male sons get stay with them, and she didn't sell those. My time, what's the reason? Zuze ansua. Financial reasons forced her to sell the ksuva, but she didn't sell that part of the ksuva. Mocheles ksuvas alabayla. But if she had that, I said it 2 minutes ago, she sold the ksuva to her husband, but if she would have forgiven it to him or wrote a receipt that she had received it, then she gives up the ksuvas banim dichrin. My time achilta, because she was mocha the whole thing. So Rashi says that the ksuva was not worth that much in her eyes, so therefore her kids do not receive it, because it shows that meaning if she would have sold it, it means that she respects the ksuva, but she had to sell it. So it's not like she doesn't want the ksuva, but when she forgives it to the husband, she doesn't even get money for it. So that's a case where she's treating the ksuva lightly. So therefore, she doesn't care, or the halacha is that we treat it as if she doesn't care about the clause in it. So if she would die before predecease her husband, her boys would not receive the ksuvas banim dichrin. By Rava. So Rava asked, if she sold it to her husband, is that the same as selling the futures to a third party and the ksuvas banim dichrin remains, or is it a case of forgiving her ksuva, writing it as if she had already received it? So Basar Dabaya have a pashta. After he asked the question, he knew the answer. Machers ksuva l'bayla k'machers l'acherim dami. If she sells it, the futures right to her husband, so then it's like she sold it to someone else, and she did it because of financial pressure, which I'm not sure exactly, because we know that Masha Kansa Isha Kanabaila, that which her husband acquires, her husband acquires. So I don't know exactly what she would have done with the money that she made from selling the future right, but her sons will retain the ksuvas banim dichrin. And again, just I keep using that term, but ksuvas banim dichrin means the ksuva of the male sons. Banim is sons, and dichrin, the dalet in the Aramaic, is the same as the zayin in Hebrew, so zacharim. It's of the male sons. Masr Rav Idi Baravin. Rav Idi Baravin asked against Rava's answer right here. Mesa ein yorshim shalzeh ve'ein yorshim shalzeh yorshim suvasa. If she died, neither heirs. So it's a mission Yivamos that if a woman whose husband went overseas, and then one aide says, this in the last two, a lot of the sugyas of aguna for the real agunas, when the husbands disappear, we don't know if they're alive or not. So there's halacha so they're in the last two chapters of Yevamos. So in a case like that, if one witness came and said that the husband is dead, she's allowed to remarry. Even though normally you need two witnesses for this, the Chachamim were lenient. So if one witness said that her husband died, and the Chachamim said she's allowed to remarry based on this witness's testimony, and then she got married, and then her husband came back. So this one aide who testified ended up being wrong. So what happens? So she has to get divorced from the second husband because she wasn't even though the Beis Din had paskin that she could get remarried, but clearly she was still married to the first husband. So she couldn't have been married to the second husband. She has to leave that husband. And the first husband, now she had married someone else. So she can't stay married to the first one either. And she doesn't have a ksuva from either one. What if she died first? So then if she had sons, whether from the first husband or whether from the second husband, neither of her sons, from whether she had sons from the first marriage or the second marriage, would inherit the ksuva. So that's what the Mishnah says. Vavinan ba, and we discussed that Mishnah. Ksubasa mayavidite. What's talking about a ksuva here? Because since it says that our text, our Gemara didn't quote the Mishnah, but I said it from Rashi, who brought the whole Mishnah. It says that she doesn't have a ksuva from either husband. So if she doesn't have a ksuva from either husband, how would her kids have the ksuva? They only have it because of her. And if she lost the right of having the ksuva, and I might say not from a fault by her own in this case, but obviously her sons wouldn't have the ksuva. So why does the Mishnah say that her sons, whether from the first marriage or the second marriage, don't get the ksuva either? Papa answered, ksuvas banim dichrin. They receive the ksuvas banim dichrin. Va'amai, so why should they not have the ksuvas banim dichrin? Hachanami lema yetzer ansa. Let us say that her yetzer hara forced her to believe the testimony from the one aide, that her husband died and she could get remarried. Meaning, according to what Rabbi had answered before, that when she had to sell the futures right of her ksuva, the ksuva's banim dichrin remains because it shows that she cares about the ksuva. It's just that she had financial pressures; she needed this money now, so the actual ksuva itself she sold, but not the ksuva's banim dichrin. So in this case, her husband had been missing. She didn't know what was going on for a few years. She was in a very terrible situation. When one aide came and said he's dead, and she's like, "Okay, he's dead," and the Beis Din there says, "Yeah, this one aide is seems to be credible in this case, and you could remarry." And she remarried. It's not that that she didn't care about her marriage. Being in the aguna was very hard for her, and just say that her yetzer, that she wanted to not be in that terrible situation of limbo anymore, ended, and she didn't want to forego the ksuvas banim dichrin. So the Gemara says, "Hasam knasu degansur rabbanon." So there in that Mishnah, the Chachamim gave her a special punishment of this monetary loss for believing the one aide. So to a certain extent, when the one aide comes, the wife is allowed to say, "I don't trust this one aide. I'm not, I don't believe he's really dead." And in that case, she couldn't get remarried. But if she feels that he's telling the truth, and she goes to the Beis Din, and the aide tells them, and they say, "If you really think so then you get remarried." But the Chachamim made a punishment in case she was wrong. She forgoes the ksuva and the ksuva's banim dichrin. So we can't compare. So even though according to the logic of Rava, does not fit in with this logic of Rav Papa over here, but that's not a contradiction, because Rav Papa answer that they lose the ksuvas banim dichrin is because in that case the Chachamim punished her, and she no longer retains the right of ksuvas banim dichrin for her sons. Yasif Rabin Rav Chanina kamed Rav Chisda. Rabin Bar Chanina was sitting in front of Rav Chisda. The Yasif Ka'amar Bishmei de Rabbi Lazar, and was saying in the name of Rabbi Lazar, Machal Ksuvas Labaila Ein La Mezonos. If a woman forgave the ksuva to her husband, and then therefore when he died, she doesn't have to pay the ksuva. They doesn't have to pay the ksuva. She does not get fed from his estate when if he dies first. So we learned a couple weeks ago that she has to be fed from the estate, not from her ksuva. until she would get remarried, if she would get remarried. But this halacha is telling us, Rabbi Lazar had taught that if she waived her ksuva, she forgave it. So even though she forgave the ksuva and the mezonos, the money to feed her, and if you remember, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we learned about also doctor's treatments. Where is it ongoing doctor's treatment versus temporary doctor's treatment? So she also loses the right of being of getting food from her husband's estate. It would be in his estate, meaning not according to the Torah law, according to Midiyaisa, before some of these takanos that we learned, if the husband would die first, she would get from his estate, she would get her ksuva, and then the sons would split up the remaining assets according to, if there's a bechor, you would get a double portion. So if there'd be 3 sons, one of them was a bechor, they'd make it into 4 portions, and the bechor would get 2, and the other sons would each get 1. So that's the way that the estates would be split up. So then with some of these takanos that we were learning about, so after these takanos, so she would get, so I don't know exactly how it would work, but there's some type of, so from the estate, she would get the ksuva. There must be some type of, I will call it a trust fund, just because that's what we're thinking of nowadays, but I don't know exactly how it would work to pay for her ongoing food and for any girls, young girls who are still, who they would still have, who aren't married. With the Gemaras, we're going to learn today about how long those girls might get, with Machlokas Tanaim, to get fed and some dowry for them, and then Yerusha. So how exactly, what is kept so that the sons get the rest, or is it like, I've heard of some cases where it takes years and years to close out an estate. So I don't know exactly in halacha how it would work, but that's the general parameters. So does that answer the question?
Yeah.
You probably know more than I do, because from the tax end, you know about some of the things that go on. So I don't know that much in the legal system. I don't know from that end at all. Amar Le, Rav Chisda said, if you wouldn't have said in the name of a great man, meaning Rebbe Lazar, I would have said the pasuk that if you give bad in place of good, bad will not come from your house. So he would have thought, he would have paskined, if not for hearing this, that she would keep the mezonos. So even though this ruling was against what he would have paskined when he heard that Rebbe Lazar had paskined this way, he accepted the fact of Rebbe Lazar. Meaning, so you see the Eretz Scroll says in the note, since the woman did her husband a favor of waiving her ksuva, she should not suffer the loss of sustenance for widowhood. That she did something good for him, and how does she get repaid? She doesn't even get mezonos. So it would have been a pretty, heads I win, tails you lose. She waived it, and then she doesn't even get the mezonos afterwards. Yosef, Rav Nachman of Ula, Avimi Barapapi. Rav Nachman of Ula and Abimi Barapapi were sitting. The Yosef, Rav Chia bar Ami Gabayhu, and Rav Chia bar Ami was sitting with them. Asahu Gava Deshchiva Rusaso. So there was a certain man came in who his fiance, meaning so he had given her the ring, but they didn't have Nisuin yet, and she had died. So before we say that, there is so there's a Tosos and Kesuvos, in Kedushin Daf Samachay, said from a Gemara here on Daf Samachay in Kedushin, not here, but in Kedushin, Rashi says, so this is a slightly different case, that a widow from Erison has a ksuva, even if it wasn't written, because in this Gemara here in Kedushin, it wasn't written, because if it was written, everyone would know that you would have to fulfill the words of the contract. And then Kesuvos and Daf Peites, so we're not so close to that yet. The question is, if she's a widow from Erison, does she have a ksuva? Does she not have a ksuva? Why doesn't the Gemara answer it from the Gemara in Kedushin that assumed that she does have a ksuva? But Tosos answers. The Gemara wants to know if there's a Mishnah that would answer it and not just a Gemara. So, if people are engaged, is there ksuva? So, from the Tosos I just gave you, Tosos says that there would be, but also that's the reverse case. That's saying if they were engaged and then the husband died, does she get the ksuba? Here it's the opposite case. So, but again, it doesn't seem to be so pashut from stuff that we've learned up until now that an arusa has a ksuba yet. That we write the ksuva before the nesuin. And then I think we saw from Daf Aleph, I think in the Rif, I think the Nemuke Yosef brings an opinion of writing the ksuva during Shabbat brachos. I think that if you got married on Shabbos, that she would take some metaltalin as a ksuva until after Shabbos when the ksuva would be written. So that was a case where the ksuva wasn't even written before the nesuin, but we wouldn't do that now. But so the Gemara here asks, so he gave her the ring, and it seems that there was a ksuva already, and she died, and he wanted to know if he has to pay for the funeral, because we learned that the husband is obligated to pay for the funeral, but because it was only from Erison and they never did the chuppah yet, does he have to pay for her funeral or not? Amrila, they told him Zilkvar Havla ksuva, so either bury her or pay the ksuva, which obviously she's not alive, so she would have to give the ksuva, I guess, to her her father, I guess. Amr lahu Reb Chia, so Reb Chia, who was sitting in front of them, said to them, Tanina, but we learned in a brayso, lo ishta arusa lo onein v'lo mitamela. If his wife died and they didn't have chuppah yet, only kedushin, he's not an onein, and if he's a kohen, he's not allowed to become tameh for her. V'chein, and similarly, if the husband died from Erison, he lo onenes, she doesn't have a state of aninos for him, v'lo mitamelo, and she doesn't become tameh for her. So obviously, there's no prohibition for kohanos, for female kohanim to become tameh, but it means she doesn't have to attend the funeral or be involved in the preparations for the funeral. V'chein mesa, and if she dies, eno yarsha, he doesn't get any yerusha from her if certain things were given to her in a ksuva or in the dowry. It only takes place once the nesuin takes place. But mace, who gova ksuvasa. Where does it say who? He collects the ksuva, or she collects the ksuva. This says who, but it doesn't make sense. We'd have to say he, that she would inherit the ksuva. So Taima demes who? The reason is that she gets a ksuva is because he died. Hamesa he ain't la ksuva, but that implies that if she died, she doesn't have the right to ksuva. Now, if she dies, obviously the husband doesn't have to pay ksuva, but it means the husband would have to bury her. So from one half of the mission, it sounds like they're married enough that she has a ksuva. So if she did, he would have to pay for the ksuva. But from the fact that it says mesa he, it implies that there is no ksuva. So from that mishnah, it implies that he wouldn't have to pay for her ksuva. So how come Rav Chia Baram, Rav Nachman and Ulam Avimi Rapapi said that he has to pay for her funeral? So Gemara says, my taima, why wouldn't he have to bury her? or pay for her funeral, for her burial. Amrav Hoshia she'ein ani koreba l'chshetinasi la'achar titli ma shekasav lechi. Because part of the Kesuvos is if you get married to someone else, you'll take what was written for you. So since she's dead and she can't get married at all anymore, so the clause that would have obligated her husband or her almost husband to pay for the funeral is not relevant. Kiyasa Ravin Amar Reish Lakish, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, he said in the name of Reish Lakish, Arusa Shemesa Ein Luksuvasa, an Arusa who died does not have a ksuva, which means her husband, they would not bury him. So this is against the psak that the three Amoraim we just saw. Amrlu Abaye responded to them, Zilu Amrile, go tell Ravin, Shekila Tivu Shadya Achizre. Basically, you did us a favor. The good that you did, throw it into the thorns. Rav Hoshia the Bavel. Rav Hoshia already explained this in Bavel, and we don't pass him like that. Wait, that's not what you're saying. No, Rav Hoshia. Meaning, he's actually saying we didn't need you to bring us this teaching from Ravin because we already have Rav Hoshia's psak about it. So you're not teaching us anything that we don't know yet. So he's saying basically this psak that you brought us from Ravin, we already had this psak anyway. So we can throw it into the thorns because we already know this halacha. Okay. So the Mishnah said that if you have female children, they'll live in my house and be fed from my property until they get married. That's what the Mishnah says. So Rav Tani adesila kon leguvrin, Valevi Tani adesibagron. Rav understood explained the Mishnah that it meant that they had to get fed and live in the house until they got married. But Levi only says until they became a boger, so about 12 and a half. L'Rav afagav de boger, v'Levi afagav de insiv. So does this mean that according to Rav, that she gets fed and housed from the father's estate? Does that mean even if she's a bogeres? And according to Levi, if she got married when she was a katana or a nara, she would keep getting fed from her father's estate, even if she got fully married before she was a bogeres. It doesn't make sense. It can't be that way. Ella bagar v'lo insiv. So it means that according to Levi, if she reached the bogeres but didn't have a nesuin yet, or insiv v'lo bagar, or excuse me, not Levi, but for everyone, bagar v'lo insiv, if she came a bogeres and she's not married yet, or insiv v'lo bagar, or she got married and she's not even a bogeres yet, she's only 12, let's say, or 11 and a half. Kuli amalo pligi. Everyone agrees that a full bogeres or full nesuin, even if she's not a bogeres, no longer receives food from her father's estate. Ki pligi, when's the machlok between Levi and Rav? Barus of lo bagar. If she had she's an arusa, so she didn't have chuppah yet, and she's not a bogeres yet. So Rav says that's just ikachan leguvrin, and it's enough that she has erison, even though she didn't have chuppah yet. Then she doesn't get food from her father's estate yet. But Levi would hold that that she'll in this state, she's not 12 and a half yet, and she has only erison. She will get fed from her father's estate either until the nesuin or until she becomes a bogeres, whichever happens first. So if she became a bogeres and the chuppah didn't happen yet, the funding is cut off. Or if she had chuppah, even though she's not a bogeres yet, again the funding comes off, is cut off. The Chain Tani Levi Masni say, and also Levi learned in his Mishnah. So Rashi says that, like Reb Chia made a Tosefta, Levi had his group of braisos that he felt were authoritative. So Levi himself, in his group of braisos, said Adasi Bagron until they reach Bagros, and the time comes for them to have Nesuin. So Arison is not enough. Even if she only had Arison, she still gets fed from the father's estate until either Bogeres or until Nesuin. So Tarti, you need both. Ella it doesn't mean both. She needs to be a Bogeres and marriage. No. Either one of them, whichever comes first. If she becomes a Bogeres, she no longer gets food from her father's estate. Or if she had chuppah, then she doesn't get food from her father's estate anymore. Ketanai. So this machlokas between Rav and Levi is really like a machlokas in the Mishnah. Admasei abasni zones. Until when is a daughter fed from her father's estate? Achatearis, until she has erison. So that would follow Rav's opinion. Mishum Rabbi Elazar Amr, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, the Tana, not the Rabbi. Not the so there was a Rabbi Elazar we saw on the previous Amud, but that was an Amora. This is a Tana Rabbi Elazar until she reaches Bagros. So Levi's opinion follows the Tana Rabbi Elazar. Hani Rabbi Yosef taught Adisi Havyan until they're married. So Havya the Erison or Avaya the Nesuin? Does he mean marriage of Erison, the first stage, or the marriage of Nesuin, which is the chuppah? So Teku. We don't know what Rabbi Yosef meant. Amar Rav Chisda Rav Yosef. Rav Chisda said to Rav Yosef, Mi Shemielach Minay Rav Yehuda. Did you hear the following from Rav Yehuda? Arusa yesh mezonos o ein mezonos. Did you hear from Rabbi Yehuda Paskin that a girl who had erison but not yet nesuin, does she still get food from her father's estate or not? Amar le Rav Yosef said Mishma lo shmieli. I did not hear this ruling from Rav Yehuda. Ela misvara leisle, but from what I know, I would say that she would not receive food from erison. Kaven de Irsa Lonichale de Sizet Tezel, because once she already got married for erison, her husband would not want her to have to beg for food if she would need food. So even from the state of erison now, it would be upon her husband to feed her and no longer for the father's estate. Amar le Rav Chisda said back to Rav Yosef, if you didn't hear this misvara isla, I would give you a reason that her father's estate would keep feeding her. Since her new husband hasn't completely married her, he didn't take her chuppah into his house yet. He's not going to throw away his money for nothing. So, since it's possible that he will not go through with the nesuin, she only gets sustained from her new husband once nesuin happens. But again, one thing that I'm not sure about, according to the opinions, and it must be that there's a machlokes shonim, because not everyone would pass like this Tosos and Kedushin that I found, that if there's a ksuva from erison, her new husband should have to feed her already. I would think. Unless the questions that this Gemara is asking is according to these extra tanai, these extra conditions that the Chachamim put into a ksuva, did they say that how long do they last? So maybe the questions that these Gemara are talking about is when the Chachamim instituted these safeguards for the girls into their mother's ksuva, the Gemara is asking, did the Chachamim make this that it would extend until they fully age out of the house through Bogeret Bagros, according to Rav, or until they get fully married, according to, only until Erison, which is what Rav said, or when they either become a Bogeres or Nesuin, according to Levi, or I lost my train of thought here. Or if she has Erison, and maybe if the new husband would write a ksuva in that case, would that terminate the support of food from her father's ksuva or not? So maybe it's how long did the Chachamim extend this support for her? The Ikeda Amri, but some said that the discussion between Rav Yosef and Rav Chisda was the opposite. That Rav Yehuda said, that Rav Yosef said, I didn't hear what Rav Yehuda says, but my svara is she would receive the food from her father's estate, because since she hasn't fully been married yet by her husband doesn't have to pay for her yet. And Amar Lei, Rav Chisda said to Rav Yosef, that since, I would say misvara the opposite, that since there's already Erison, he wouldn't want her to look bad to have to beg, so therefore her new husband will support her even though they haven't had Nesuin yet. So this Ikeda Amri is just, was Rav Yosef the one who says from a svara that she retains getting food from her father's estate, or is he the one who holds that she does not? So they just flip the opinions of who said what. That's what these two opinions were. Siman de Gavri Shak Zara. So the next few questions in the Gemara, there's a mnemonic to remember them. Gavri Shak Zaraf. Siman de Gavri Shak Zaraf. The siman for the names for the sages who taught this is Shak Zaraf. So Shin, Kuf, Zayin, Reish, Pei. Man of Yibma Shnia, Arusa, Vanusa. And they have to do with the case of Miyun. So Miyun is a girl whose father died, and then her brother and or mother married her off when she's a Ketana. So when the father's alive, the father has full control to marry her off. If the father dies, her mother and her brother do not have rights. And if they did marry her off, she can just say, I do not want to be married to this guy, and the marriage is null and void as if it never happened. That's what Miyun is. Yavama Shnia, a Yavama is a woman who has to do Yibum. Shnia. So Shnia is someone who Midiraisa is not considered an ancestral relationship, but the Chachamim made a few relationships which weren't super close, but close enough, and called them incestuous relations also, but those are called Shnios Larayos, secondary Arayos. Arusa, a case of Arusa, and Anusa, a case of a girl who was raped, or a woman who was raped. So Bamina Rav Sheshis. So our mnemonic is Shak Zaraf. So the Shin is Sheshis. They asked Rav Sheshis, mezonos. So she got married when she was a Ketana. So even if once there's chuppah, she leaves the father's control completely. Now the father's dead, but she leaves the estate completely. So when she was a Ketana before she got married, she would be fed from her father's estate. Once there's Nesuin, she no longer gets fed from her father's estate. But because she's allowed to tell the basin, I do not want to be married to this guy, and the marriage is considered completely null and void as if it never happened. So now she's still a Ketana, and it's as if she was never married. So does her father's estate still have to pay for her food or not? or since we thought that there was a wedding at one time and she had left the father's estate from paying for her, does the father's estate have to start paying for her food again or not? You understand the case? So Amarlu Rav Sheshes says Tanisua. We learned about it in a brisa. Amana bevesavia, a widow in her father's house, meaning before chuppah. Ugrusha bevesavia, or a divorced woman in her father's house. So when it says besavia, it means that the chuppah didn't happen yet. Vishemeres yavam bevesavia, or someone who's waiting for yibum still in her father's house, meaning her husband died from again before chuppah, and so he certainly doesn't have any kids with her, but he doesn't have any kids at all yet. So he has to do yibum. She has to do yibum. Yesh mezonos. She gets fed from her father's estate, meaning if their father is dead. Obviously, if her father's alive, he still has to pay for it. Rabbi Yehuda says, Oda bevesavia yesh mezonos. If she's still in her father's house, the father's estate feeds her. Ein bevesavia, ein la mezonos. So the Gemara asks, Rabbi Yehuda, Hainu Tanakama. What Rabbi Yehuda says is the same as the Tanakama. If she's in a besavia, she has mezonos. He's not saying any different than the Tanakama said. So what's he adding? What's he arguing about? He must be saying something different, or else we wouldn't have his opinion. So the only difference that Rabbi Yehuda has that we could say he's arguing with the Tanakama is a case of this minor girl who was married off by her brother or her mother who can nullify the marriage. The Tanakama savar Isla, Rabbi Yehuda savar Leisla. That according to the Tanakama, she does receive after the nullification of her marriage. According to the first opinion, the Brisa, her father's estate would have to feed her. According to Rabbi Yehuda, she doesn't, because he just says Oda bevesavia. She's still in her father's house. Well, because she had Nesuin, she had left the father's house. Bar Reish Lakish. So the second question was, they asked Reish Lakish, Bas Yavama, the daughter of a Yavama, Yesh la mezonos, or Ein la mezonos. Does she get mezonos or not? So the question is, why shouldn't she? The Tosfos explains that. So I don't know what the halacha is about a ksuva for a yavama, but my guess is, and I shouldn't guess, but if the yavama, if the yava marries her, he needs to write her a ksuva. But it seems that there was no ksuva, so we know that obviously he would have to support her, and we're not sure if he have to support the daughter. I don't understand why this is a question, but that's what the Gemara is asking. Do we say Kevan Damarmar, since we learned in a brisa Kesuvasa al Nichse Baila Harishon? Oh, this is because the ksuva of the Yavama is against the property of her first husband, not the Yavam, but her first dead husband, Leisla. Do we say that she doesn't have support because this was not a daughter of the first husband? It's a daughter of the first husband's brother through Yibam. Odilmer, do we say Kevan the East, the Ilaisle Marishon Takinula Rabbanon Misheni, if there's no ksuva from the first husband. The Chachamim would say that she has to have a ksuva from the second husband. Isla, we would say that the daughter has a ksuva from her biological father, which is her wife's second husband. Hey, we don't know the answer to that. So it seems that the whole shaila is hinged on the fact that her ksuva doesn't have to get paid by the brother who she's now married to. It gets paid from her original husband, who is now deceased, and that's why she had to go to Yibum, by his estate. And so because this daughter is not a daughter of that husband, maybe the ksuva obligation doesn't apply. By Rabbi Lazar. So it was Shak Zaraf. So new Rabbi Lazar doesn't start with a Zion, but for the name Elazar, a Zion is, I guess, an important consonant sound. In the Yerushalmi, a lot of times it would just say Lazar without the aleph completely at the beginning, because the aleph doesn't really make a noise either, and depending, I guess, on the accents of the Aramaic in the Gemara Yerushalmi, they skip the aleph altogether. But I guess this isn't an important Talmudic thought at all. But I guess the Zion is a beginning sound of a syllable, and when it's Elazar, the lamed isn't part of isn't beginning of a syllable, and the ayin for Elazar, the is not a strong syllable either, the ayin. So we have it as a Zion. Bashniya yesh mezonos or ein mezonos. So if someone married someone who midiraisa, they were not considered an incestual relationship, but the Chachamim say you're close enough related that you can't be married, because we know that the Chachamim made a fence. They make fences to support to strengthen the Torah law. So certain close relatives, when the Torah law could be married, but they got married anyway. So we see that people who did this, they didn't listen to the Chachamim's ruling about not marrying Shniyos Arayos. So would we say that they agreed with the Chachamim's obligation that they would have to that the daughter would have to get fed from his estate? Because remember, our Mishnah says that if certain clauses were not put into the Ksuva, the husband has to pay them anyway because there's a Tanai based in. So here, when we do something what we know that Chazal are against, would we assume, so you don't care about Chazal, so you don't need their psak either. Yesh mezonos or ein mezonos. I mean, maybe I'm that's the way that I would say the question. Maybe I'm a little harsh in saying that. Kaven deleisu ksuva. So since she doesn't have a ksuva, leis lemizone, so the daughter shouldn't receive. Oh, so there's a Mishnah on Daf Kuf Amud Beis that says the wife doesn't have any ksuva or mezonos for marrying this case, that the Chachamim said she's not allowed to be married to her. So since the mother doesn't have a ksuva, does the daughter get fed from the father's estate if he died? Odom, or do we say ima da avda yisura kansura banan? Or do we say the wife who violated the Chachamim's law, she lost her ksuva, but ihi, the girl, the law of the yisura, she didn't do anything wrong. Lo kansura banan. The Chachamim didn't give a knas for her. Take it. We don't have an answer to that. There was a din Torah, a certain organization, someone who used to be employed by a certain organization wanted to sue for severance years after they stopped working, because Moshe Feinstein's opinion is that if someone worked for a Jewish institution, they would get a certain type of severance pay that he calls Chodesh Lashana. Basically get a month's worth of wages for every year you would have worked in the organization. But that organization did certain things as their, they were important to this organization's goal that was against certain psukim of Moshe Feinstein. So if I heard about it after the words, but if I would have heard about it, when the din Torah was going on, I would have told the person, you have no claim here because the organization rejects Ramosha Feinstein's psukim in this, and this area. So they could easily say we don't pass like Ramosha Feinstein for the severance either. There's other poskim who don't hold of like Ramosha Feinstein about severance. So just because Ramosha Feinstein holds about that, we know that they don't that Ramosha Feinstein was not their posting. And it was undisputed that Ramosha Feinstein was not their posting. So to a certain extent, my attitude towards that case, which the guy who had brought the Din Torah told me about it later, which I was really not in. If he would have told me, I would have said don't waste your time. And he didn't win the Din Torah, but it's a certain logic like this. But but from when the Gemara says it's not exactly the same logic, but because she didn't follow Chachamim, the Chachamim, it's an explicit Mishnah that she loses her Ksuva. Boy, Rava asks, Bas Arusa Yesh Mazonos. So let's say that a couple they got married with Eris and he gave the ring, and they didn't do Ksuva. They didn't do chuppah, but then they had kids together. So yesh lamazonos or ein lamazonos. And so if they had a daughter and then the father died, would this daughter receive money from the estate for food or not? So the Gemara says, Kaven the Isla Ksuva, since the mother had a Ksuva, meaning if they wrote the Ksuva from Erison. So Rashi gives two possibilities, either because we know that the husband wrote it for her, even though they didn't have chuppah yet, or it goes according to the opinion that the Chachamim instituted that an Arusa has a ksuva, even though she didn't have chuppah yet. So since the mother has a ksuva, do we say that the daughter would get money for food from the father's estate? Or Chachamim didn't institute ksuva until Nesuin Leisla, does she not? She wouldn't get it because there's no ksuva. So according to Rashi, the question is based on the assumption that the Chachamim did institute ksuva from the time of Erison, and then when the Gemara is listing the questions, it says, well, maybe that assumption is not true. So the Gemara says, but we don't have an answer for that. By Rapapa says, Basan Sua. What about a woman who had been raped? Yesh mezonos o ein mezonos. So Rashi says this isn't just a stam. It's not a stam case of rape. This is a case of the nara of someone, a Jewish person who raped an unmarried woman. We spoke about this months ago about the psychological and stuff about this, but according to the Torah law, he would have to marry her. And we said that we learned the difference between the mafuta and an ones if the father if the daughter's okay with it, but her father doesn't. There's a difference between ones and mafuta. So this is he had raped her. They were both single. Or even if he wasn't single, before Chaim Rabbeinu Gershon, he could have more than one wife. So then he married her, and they had a daughter, and then he died. So Rashi says, and trying to understand this, does she get from the brothers? Why is it talking about the brothers? Oh, from her brothers, not the father's brothers. Okay, that makes sense. So yesh mazonos or ein mazonos. So why is this a shaila? So Ali, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. This is now on the second column on 54a1. Ali, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda lo tibaylach. According to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, there's no shaila da amar because he said yeshak ksuva mana, that this raped woman does have a ksuva of 100 zuz. So she obviously has a ksuva. So her daughter would have to be supported. But kiti boilach, the question is aliba the rabbanan according to Chachamim, who argue Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, the Amri Yatza Kesef the Amri Yatza Kesef Knasa Kiksuva, that the 100 zuz that he had to pay her as a fine counts as her ksuva, and he didn't need a separate ksuva. What's the halacha in regard to supporting the daughter? Kaven de leisu ksuva leisu mezone. Since the mother doesn't have a ksuva, does the daughter not have mezonos? Odilma ksuva taima boy kidesh lo kalabein of lotzia. Or why do we have a ksuva? In order that it's a safeguard for the woman, that it's not so easy for the husband to divorce her. But here there's a special losase. There's an explicit avera in the Torah that he's not allowed to divorce her. So is that avera by itself, without the financial considerations of Ksuva, is that a strong enough safeguard that she doesn't need a Ksuva? But it's not that there's no need for a ksuva. So we don't need a formal ksuva, but all the other obligations of ksuva would be would still exist, even though there wasn't a formal ksuva written. So teiku. So the Gemara says we don't know the answer. Okay, so now we're on 54A2. It's the nun dalet for on the second to last narrow line at the two dots. Atehei Yasba Vesi, you can live in my house and get fed from the husband's estate until she would get remarried. That's what the Mishnah says. Ten Rabbi Yosef says Vevesi below bevikte. You could live in my house, but not in my hut. So if she has a very small house that there's not enough room for everyone to live comfortably, then she doesn't have to live. If he has a decent sized house, then the basin would force his sons to give her a proper living area. Avomazono isla, but Rabbi Yosef says even in a case where they have a hut and she would have to live somewhere else, they certainly still have to pay for her food. Marbar Ravashi says, in this case, she wouldn't get food from her husband's late husband's estate either, because living together and living in his house and getting food for the support go together. And if he only had a very small hut that it's not big enough for her to live in, once they would have to say, go back to your father's house to live there, they wouldn't support her either. And the halacha is not like Marbar Ravashi. So we paskin that the husband's estate does have to pay for her food. Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, if she was extended an offer of marriage and she accepted that offer of marriage, but it seems that she didn't get married yet. So she was a widow. Someone said, and then someone said, I want to get married. I want to marry you. And she said, yes. The marriage didn't happen yet. Ein la mezonos. She doesn't get fed any longer, even though the marriage didn't take place. Haloni spaisa. So the Gemara says, if someone would have said, let's get married, and she rejected that offer of marriage, yesh la mezonos, she would keep getting food or the money for food from her late husband's estate. So the Gemara seems to be asking, should the husband's estate, meaning if she wouldn't, it seems that the Gemara is assuming that if she wouldn't have had support, she would have accepted this offer of marriage. So it ends up though that having that, if we would let her, we would still give her food from her late husband's estate, that give her some negotiation power or just power to reject something that otherwise would have been an okay match for her to get married. So now it ends up doing a disservice to the husband's estate that she's rejecting this proposal of marriage, and she's staying on the to be fed from the estate of her husband. That seems to be what the Gemara is the attitude of the Gemara right now. So Rav Anan said, it was explained to me what Shmuel meant. Amra machmas ploni baili, if she says, someone offered her to get married and she says no because the memory of my late husband, then yesh la mezonos. She keeps the mezonos because she's talking about with respect and honor her husband. So the fact that his estate will keep paying for mezonos is not a bad thing, because she's showing a certain level of respect. Maybe she doesn't have to anymore, but she keeps it. But machmas bnei adam she'enan mehuganin law. But if she says, I got an offer of marriage, but they're a lower social class than what I should marry. So when she's worrying about her own kavod, then ein la mezonos. Then she loses out. Her late husband estate is going to pay for her if she stays single for a long time or stays widowed a long time out of respect for him. But if she's doing it just from her own kavod, then it has nothing to do with him. So then his estate doesn't have to pay for her anymore when she had a real offer of marriage. Rav Chisda said zinsa ein la mezonos. So this doesn't literally mean that she had committed adultery because she was a widow, but if she had relations with someone without getting married to them, she no longer gets mezonos from her first husband's estate. Amar Rabbi Yosef kichlo perchasa. What if she got big makeup and her hair done? Ein la mezonos. She doesn't have mezonos anymore either. Manda Amar Zinsa, according to the first opinion. So I guess Rashi doesn't say this explicitly, but I think the point is that it doesn't really happen. I don't think it happens so much now. It used to be the widows dressed. There was a certain way that widows dressed. So, and that would include, I know, wearing black clothes, whatever, and not getting the fancy hair and the fancy makeup. If she got this makeup and hair, it shows that she's not considering herself a widow anymore. So because of that, so then her late husband's estate doesn't have to support her anymore. According to the opinion that says if she had sexual relations with someone without getting married, if she loses her ksuva koshken kithlo perchasa. Certainly that if she got the fancy makeup and the fancy hairstyle, she loses the food from her husband's estate also. But according to the opinion that she loses the ksuva if she got the fancy makeup or the fancy hairdo, avozinsa isla. That implies that if she had relations with someone, even though she didn't marry him, she continues to receive mezonos. My time, what's the reason? Yetzer ansa. So her Yetzer hara led her to do this, but the opinion, the urge or the inclination to have relations with someone is it's more of a like an on the spot decision, whereas to go to get the fancy makeup and put it on and to get the hairdo, it's not like an instant decision, a snap-second decision. So that's something more planned. So when she does that, that shows that she has chosen to not really identify as the widow anymore. To have relations with someone, she could still see herself as a widow, and one moment of weakness or Yetzer hara, so she did that. But it's not that she is no longer identifying herself as so-and-so's widow. But we don't pass like any of these teachings. We passing like a different statement in the name of Shmuel that was taught by Rabbi Yehuda. If she demands her ksuva in Beistin, ein la mezonos. She does not receive mezonos. So meaning, if the ksuva, her actual ksuva payment doesn't get paid out, then she can continue to get money from the ksuva. But once she demands the payment of the 200 zuz or whatever her ksuva is, then that terminates to show that she wants the money from his estate. That shows that she's cutting herself off from her late husband, and then the money from her late husband's estate stops. We'll just go a few more lines below. But once she came in to Basin and says, I want my ksuva paid in full, she doesn't get mezonos anymore. But we learned in the brayso, if she sold her ksuva, the future rights to her ksuva to someone else, or if she used her ksuva as collateral for a loan. She's made her ksuva something that's collectible. Apotiki, it's a Greek word. To someone else, ein la mezonos. So in that case, she doesn't have mezonos. So we wanted to make a diuk from this Mishnah. Hani in, either selling her ksuva or using it as a security on a loan. In those cases, she learns ksuva. But if she would demand for the payment of her ksuva, she wouldn't lose her ksuva. So the Gemara says, Hani bein bevesin. No, she would also lose her ksuva if she demanded it from Basin. So how come it's not listed in that brayso? Because Hani bein bevesin bein shelo bevesin. Whether she sold it through Basin or just on the open market, not through Basin, or she uses it as a collateral even on the open market and the street market, not necessarily through Basin, she loses her ksuva. But Tovas, when she wants her late husband's estate to pay her full ksuva, the Basin in shelo bevesin lo. She only loses ksuva if she asks for a payment in Basin. If she asked for it not in Basin, she went to the executor of the estate, which in halacha, if there usually wouldn't be an executor unless there was the kids were minors and you'd have an apotropos. But she went to one of the oldest son, let's say, and says, I want to pay for ksuva. So that's not in front of Basin, so that she wouldn't lose her ksuva yet. She'd only lose it when she asks in Basin for her ksuva to be paid in full. So we'll leave it here. So the two dots. V'kacha Yohan Yerushalayim.